Hey there! This video is the fourth and final video in a series of tutorials where we take a look at all 172 extensions present in the latest release of Inkscape. This time we'll be finishing by looking at all extensions in the last 5 menus: styles, text, typography, visualize path, and web. But before that, I would like to remind you that I make Inkscape tutorials like this every week, so if you're interested, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to enable the notifications. Also, a like and comment are highly appreciated and helps the channel grow. Okay, let's finish with the extensions. The Styles menu has extensions that deal with the style, that is, the type of properties that you can set in the fill and stroke dialog, plus some other stuff related to programming CSS. Color markers allows you to give your markers custom colors. In case you aren't familiar with markers, if you go to the Fill and Stroke Dialog's Stroke Style tab, you can use the Markers dropdown to give your nodes different icons. These are a special type of objects that are stuck to the stroke and cannot be edited on the canvas. And more importantly for this extension, they change color to match the stroke color, so it's impossible to give them their own color unless you redraw them, but that's a complicated subject for another video, maybe. But let me know in the comments if you would like a tutorial on markers. Anyway, continuing. This extension will let you change the colors of the markers. The From Object tab changes the color according to the color of the shape they are applied to. Marker type sets the type to solid or filled. Solid makes them a single color, and filled makes them have fill and stroke. The Custom tab gives you the same color selection mode from the fill and stroke dialog to change the fill and stroke of the marker. Overall, really useful extension if you work with markers. Interpolate attribute in a group is an interesting extension with a lot of potential. Basically lets you interpolate between a group of attributes, such as width, height, scale, and opacity. It works a lot like the Interpolate Shapes extension we already saw, but with custom attributes. The drop-down attribute to interpolate has all the attributes you can interpolate. I've had problems with some of them throwing an error for no reason, and I still have no idea how to use the other attributes correctly, but the common ones, width, scale, and opacity, work just fine. Anyway, you have to set the start value and the end value in these input boxes, and for every selected object, the extension will interpolate the selected attribute between those values. Like with most extensions we've seen, I feel it could have been so much more useful if it was more developed and with better UI, and maybe with at least a bit of documentation. As it is, I don't think it's that useful. Merge styles into CSS will create CSS code out of the style attributes of the selected object. In case you aren't aware, there is quite a lot of functionality inside of Inkscape for web development, and the possibility to edit some CSS code is one of them. I don't want to go in depth into that because I know nothing of web development and I don't want to say something wrong. Plus, this extension does only that, creates a CSS class with the color and fill stroke properties of the selected object. Mesh gradient to path from the Mesh Gradient submenu creates paths that match the shape of the applied mesh gradient. In Inkscape, a mesh gradient works a bit like its own path that can or not match the shape of the path it's applied to, so this extension can be more useful than you'd think. The only option in the extension is the mode. Outline will create a path that only matches the outline of the gradient. Grid and patches add other paths on top to match the subdivisions of the mesh gradient. And faces make each subdivision its own shape, though sadly it often fails to close them properly. Path to mesh gradient, also from the Mesh Gradient submenu, is the companion to the previous extension. It will transform a 4-node path into a mesh gradient. This way allowing you to first draw the shape with the pen tool and then transform it into a mesh gradient. And that sounds awesome at first, because in Inkscape you cannot do that, like in Adobe Illustrator, but the problem is that it doesn't work like you think at all. The shape has to have 4 nodes, so there is that limitation. Plus, you cannot add other paths to control the subdivision, which will be the main reason to use this extension over just going to the Mesh Gradient tool and clicking on the object. Voronoi Pattern Fill will generate a Voronoi diagram, like the Voronoi extension we already saw, that will be applied and used like a normal everyday pattern field that you can see and edit and even reuse with another object if you want. Average size of cell handles the size of each cell. Size of border defines where does it end. Leave it at 0. I really don't know why this needed its own extension. It would have been more or less the same to include a Voronoi pattern in the built-in patterns list. The text menu has extensions related to text. Some of them are well worth to learn for everyday work, especially if you work handling PDF files. Alphabet Soup will cut and displace the individual letters of a text to give it this glitchy look. The text is always generated at the center of the document. This extension cannot be applied to a text object. You'll need to use this text input to create a new one. Scale changes the size of the text, and Randomize will mess up the text even more to the point it becomes unrecognizable. The Change Case submenu contains 6 extensions which all do very similar things. They all change the case, so I'm gonna treat them as a single one. Sentence Case will change the case so the uppercase letter will match a sentence, with the uppercase right after every dot. Title Case will make it so the very first letter of every word is uppercase. Uppercase, it's all uppercase. Flip Case will flip any uppercase letter with a lowercase one and the other way around. Lowercase, it's all lowercase. And Random Case, it's all random. Convert Braille will do that. Convert the selected text to Braille, which is a type of text that uses reliefs so visually impaired people can read. Extract from Selection will identify the text in your document and display it on a text prompt as text. This is more useful in cases where you have access to text, but it's not connected in a way easily readable, like it happens frequently when you import a PDF file into Inkscape. Formula, pdfLatex, does not open for me. Despite having the 3 dots, which means it will open up a menu, it just doesn't work. I tried searching for help online and opened it with older versions of Inkscape, but I had no luck making it work. So I guess we are skipping it. The one thing I should mention is that it appears to have something to do with writing or reading LaTeX in some way, which is a language for making mathematical signs. Hershey Text will convert the text into a plotter-friendly font, so it's easier to print. I already mentioned that I don't feel comfortable talking about this type of extensions that I cannot really test, but this one seems easy enough to understand. With the Render tab, you select the font, and with the Utilities tab, you can print an example of all the available fonts in the extension. Lorem Ipsum will generate a Lorem Ipsum text, which is a very well-known type of placeholder text. Number of paragraphs will set the number of paragraphs, and sentences per paragraph sets the sentences per paragraph. In the Help tab, there is more explanation about how it works. If nothing is selected, the text will be created inside of the documents page. If a text object is selected, it will be appended. If an object is selected, the text will match the shape of the object. Merge will merge 2 or more different text objects into a single one. The spaces and separations will be respected. The extension will create a new text object inside the page. You have 3 drop-downs that control the text direction, the horizontal point, and vertical point. This is for when you are copying texts that are not aligned. Keep Style will keep any of the style in each text box after joining it. If this is not selected, the text will have the default font and properties, so most likely you'll want this checked. Replace Font will search and replace the fonts in all your text objects in the document. This is yet another extension that uses a simple text input to handle the fonts, so you better know the exact name of it. Luckily, the extensions has a tab that can help you with that. In the List All Fonts tab, you can make the extension show all the used fonts. You have a drop-down that will let you pick between showing the fonts of the entire document or only the selected fonts. Then you hit Apply, and that will open a text prompt with the proper name of the fonts. This can be useful if you have a ton of different objects that are difficult to select, or if you want the exact name of the font to not get it wrong. In the Find and Replace Font tab, you can replace a font of all instances of text. You have to specify the font you want to replace in the Find Font input, and the font you would like to replace it with in the Replace input box. The Replace Font tab allows you to straightaway replace every text in your document with a single font you specify in the Replace All Fonts input. Split Text will split a text box into multiple ones. With the Split dropdown, you get to pick lines, words, or letters, and Preserve Original lets you keep the original version. The Typography menu has extensions that are meant to help you to make your own fonts. You don't need these extensions at all to make fonts in Inkscape. In theory, these are meant to streamline the process of making them, but I found that, actually, for me at least, it makes it more confusing and complicated than if I were not to use them. But we'll go over them anyway, and I'll let you decide if they can help you or not. And just a quick warning, these extensions deal with font design, and some concepts may go unexplained, because this is not a tutorial on that, but let me know in the comments if you would like me to do a full tutorial on making your own fonts in Inkscape. That sounds a lot of fun. 1. Set up Typography Canvas. We'll give you a menu where you can set up guides, the same ones you pull out of the roller, to draw fonts more comfortably. I'm pretty sure the extension is numbered because you're supposed to use it with the next two extensions that are also numbered. As far as I know, it does the exact same thing than hitting the Setup Canvas button in the SVG font editor dialog. It even has the exact same options. I guess the developers thought it was gonna be easier to access these options from here. These input boxes define the location and separation of each guide in pixels. I won't go over what each guide means because they are related to font design, and like I said, this is not a tutorial on that. Just know that if you are into font design, then you will know what each of these inputs do just by reading the names. And that's all this extension does. 2. Add Glyph Layer will show a dialog where you can input the name of the letter, which will create a new layer with the name of that letter. It is possible to create multiple layers for different fonts at the same time by writing more than one character. To see any change, you should open the Layers and Objects dialog, and there you should see all the layers that were created. This is the moment where you will draw all the letters, one letter per layer, matching the name, and in the position set by the guides. 3. Convert Glyph Layers to SVG font. Will transform each layer into a glyph in the SVG font editor. So to see any change, you should open it by going to Text, SVG Font Editor. What the extension did internally was pretty simple. Just created a new font in the Global Settings tab, and then created new glyphs for every single layer created by the previous extension. But here's what bothers me about this extension. In order for each letter to be assigned a path that will represent it, you need to select it and hit the Get Curves button. And you would think the extension does that automatically for you. But no, you still have to go one by one through each glyph, go into each layer and select the individual shapes, and click on this button to assign it. So the only thing this extension truly does is saving you from making 2 clicks to create a new glyph and write the character. It's ridiculous in my opinion, and that's exactly how I feel about these 3 extensions. Unless they do something I'm not realizing, I don't think they are that useful or that save that much time. Convert SVG font to Glyph Layer. I'm not entirely sure about what it's doing, but I think it just removes all the assigned glyphs, breaking up the setup SVG font. So the SVG file where you drew everything no longer can be used to generate a proper font. View Next Glyph and View Previous Glyph. It's just a quick way to enable and disable the visibility of the layers where the shapes are, so it looks like you're moving up and down the different glyphs. The Visualize Path menu has extensions that draw information about paths. Dimensions will draw an arrow on the top and left side of a path, like what you will need for a diagram that shows dimensions. The only important options are the X and Y offset, which controls how apart they are from the path. Draw handles will draw strokes on the places where the handles of the selected path should be. The handles are different objects and the extension groups them all together. It has no options. Measure path will draw the length, area, or center of mass of the selected path. Measurement type lets you select the type of measurement. Like I just said, you can pick between length, area, and center of mass, which will be displayed as a little cross in the location where the center of mass of the path is. You can set the location of the text with these tabs. You can set it to be either resting on the path or at a fixed location. With the first tab, Text Presets, you can select between different common presets, like the text starting on the first node or at the center of the bounding box. With the other two tabs, you can set the same options, but with more detail. Text on Path has an offset slider that controls the position of the text on the periphery of the path. Fixed Text lets you choose other placement with the position dropdown, such as the first node, the center of the bounding box, and the center of mass. You can even place it in an angle with the angle input. Then you have other general options down here. Font size sets the size of the text. Offset, how far away the text is from the path. Precision, how much numbers show after the dot. And scale factor scales the measurement according to the input here. Finally, you can set the unit you're working on with the length unit dropdown. Number nodes replaces the nodes on the path with numbered dots. Font size is the size of the number, and dot size is the size of the dot. Starting dot number changes the order of the numbering so the counting starts at a different node, and steps is how many numbers it skips in the counting. The web menu has extensions related to web programming and interactivity. Inkscape has quite a few tools related to web design, and these extensions work with some of these tools. I must warn you that I'm not a web designer or programmer, so I'm not familiar with any of these tools. I'll do the best I can to understand and relay the information to you, but a lot of the stuff here is going over my head. Interactive Mockup will add some very minor interactivity features to the SVG file when it's opened in a browser. It will just move the view to the location of an object. You need to have two selected objects. The first object you have to select is the one that will drive the action, and the second one will be the one that the view will follow after the action has been performed. From the action dropdown, you can select different types of interaction like clicking, hover with the mouse, or just gain focus. To be able to see this, you'll need to open the SVG file with a browser and then perform the action set. I'm not entirely sure what this extension is used for, but if you're a web developer, maybe you'll have an idea. Set attributes from the JavaScript submenu lets you set an SVG attribute, I assume using JavaScript. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not entirely sure how things work internally or why you will want to use this. Attribute to set has the name of the attribute you want to set. By default, it already comes with a list of example attributes like fill and stroke. With the dropdown when should the set be done, you set the action that will trigger the change. And with value to set, you set the value. Just testing the example, it all seems to work fine, and it seems pretty intuitive. But you do have to write the attribute names, and I'm not really sure about how that works, if it's something taken directly from Inkscape or XML or JavaScript or Python. Again, I think a web developer will probably understand this better than I do. Transmit attributes, also from the JavaScript submenu, does something similar to set attributes, but this time it will copy the attributes from one object to another. Once again, you'll need to select more than one object. The first object will be the one transmitting the attributes, and any other object after that will receive them. And again, you'll need to know the exact name of the attributes and write them in the input box, attribute to transmit. By default, there is already some example attribute written, fill. You need to set the action that will trigger the transmission with the dropdown when to transmit. And that's it. Now you open the SVG file in a browser and the attributes will be copied over. Create a slicer rectangle from the slicer submenu. Apparently will let you slice different parts of an image or something. This one, I have to be honest, I have absolutely no idea what is this extension used for or how to use it. There is no documentation anywhere. I did find an entry in a page that seems to be related to this extension that mentioned that this is some sort of slicer for web pages but I don't understand what's the purpose of the raster image options. I'm guessing it is supposed to be used with web mockups, but yeah, I have absolutely no idea how to make this work. Hitting apply will create a red rectangle and a layer called web slicer, but without documentation anywhere and no help tab as a guide, I'm gonna have to skip this one. Export layout pieces and HTML+CSS code is another extension from the slicer submenu, and this is yet another extension I have no idea what it does or how to use it. I think it has to be used in conjunction with the previous one, and obviously it has something to do with web development, so yeah, that's another skip for me. Set layout group is the final extension in the slicer submenu, and the final extension we are gonna cover. And yet again, like all extensions from the slicer submenu, we're gonna have to skip it because I couldn't make it work or have any idea what it is or what it's used for. I wish the final extension from this huge list would have been something more interesting to finish on, but once again I'm not a web developer and without documentation I couldn't figure this submenu. And that's it. We finally covered all 172 extensions in the latest release of Inkscape. Now we know a bit more of those obscure features Inkscape has. But maybe we can keep learning more about Inkscape. Let me know in the comments if you would like me to cover other obscure parts of the software. We did path effects, we did extensions. How about filters now? Or other features that I talked about in the extensions themselves, like Sync or the font editor. Inkscape is so much more powerful and deep than people give it credit, and I love to get deeper and deeper into it. One last thing before ending the video, I make Inkscape tutorials every week. If you get any use out of these or past videos, why not like and subscribe to the channel? It really helps other people to discover it and keep it alive. That was it for now. Have a great day. Bye.